I want to thank Sharon and David so much for agreeing to present their work from this important period of time for our country, and I cannot tell you how thankful I am. So really, just a heartfelt thank you. So I want to thank our sponsors, which are Profoto Daily, Archive Magazine, Epson Printers, Photo Shelter, AIPI American Photography, and without further ado, we have David Valdez, who was going to tell us about the first Bush administration. You're on, David.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. The first question everybody asks is, how did you get the job? And I have to go back to how did I get into photography? And when I graduated high school, I received a letter from President Nixon inviting me to join the military. And so I was 18 years old and I went into the military, and they trained me as a photographer. And I did that for 4 years in the military. And when I got out, I moved up to Washington, D.C. By that time, I was 21, 22 years old, and started working in the federal government as a photographer at the Department of Agriculture at the beginning, and at Housing and Urban Development. People always say, well, what was that all about? And this was the early 70s, and the federal government was kind of rebuilding some of the inner cities at that time. And so I spent a lot of time traveling around the country photographing inner city areas. I was all in Watson, Harlem, and also going to Indian reservations, and they had a program called New Communities, and they were building a lot of new areas, and I was out documenting all of that. And just so happened that at the time, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, was a part of that. And so I was one of the first federal employees out to federal disasters to document that. And but all this time I was going to college, and when I graduated high school, went right into the military. I was like, well, I had planned on going to college, but I got sidetracked. And so I just started taking one class at a time every night for years, and wound up getting a degree in journalism from the University of Maryland, which is in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. And then I thought, well, gee, now I've been a photographer now for 7, 8 years, and I have a degree in journalism. I'm going to go get a job at Time Magazine or the Washington Post. And then like, looking at me crazy. And so I kept looking and looking and looking. And I got hired by the United States Chamber of Commerce to be their head photographer, and that's right across the street from the White House. And then I started doing a lot of stuff up on Capitol Hill. You've seen the news photographers crawling around in Senate hearings, and I was one of those guys. But then the U.S. Chamber of Commerce was sending me around the country photographing the president of Coca-Cola or General Motors or the small business guy out in Fresno, California or someplace. And so I was literally traveling all the time. 2 to 3 weeks out of every month I was on the road or on Capitol Hill. And one day, December 1983, I was on an assignment to photograph the wife of the Vice President of the United States, Barbara Bush. And while we were waiting, Scott Applewhite, who's from the Associated Press in Washington, D.C., a photographer there, told me that Vice President Bush's photographer was leaving, and I did a little research and found out that the Vice President's photographer reported to the Vice President's press secretary, and so I wrote her a letter, Shirley Green, who was the press secretary, and introduced myself, and I'm a Texan, and Shirley and most of the Bush staff at the time were Texans, and I got invited in to interview with the press secretary, Shirley Green. And then she invited me back to interview with the chief of staff, who was a retired Navy Admiral, Dan Murphy. And he beat me up in the interview. He was not holding back. He was pushing my buttons. He was like, I got to see what this guy's made of. But having grew up in a military family, and then I was in the military myself. I knew how to say yes sir, no sir, and use that sir a lot. But when I left there, I thought, there is no way, this guy just hates me. Then I got called back for a third interview. And so now I'm going to go back and I'm going to interview with the Vice President of the United States. And I was outside his office and in the old executive office building. And it was time for my interview. And it never quite hit that this guy, David Valdez from South Texas, Alice, Texas, where I was born, is going to go meet one-on-one with the Vice President of the United States. And so I go in, and this was George Herbert Walker Bush, and he was like the kindest person I'd ever met. And he was showing me around his office there in the old executive office building, and showing me pictures of his grandchildren and saying, well, you're going to be with me in public and private, and we have to have this relationship. And I was saying, yeah, I understand. Because when I was in the military, I was photographing, a lot of people start photography photographing babies or pets or something. Well, when I started, I was photographing the 3- and 4-star generals in the military. And so that's all I knew, is being around high level people in terms of my photography. And the way he was talking to me, it sounded like I had already been offered the job, and no one had offered me the job. So no one had ever said what the salary was. So I thought, well, this guy thinks I have the job. I better ask him what the salary is. So I said, well, do you know what the salary is? And he said, I have no idea. Why don't we call up Admiral Murphy, who's the chief of staff, who's the guy that beat me up. And so he picks up the phone. He's in the old executive office building. The walls are that thick. And he says, hey, Dan, I'm in here with Dave Valdez. And he's asking me what the salary is. And through the walls, I could hear him screaming, what? He's asking you about salary? I thought, oh, this is it. They're going to throw me out of here. Well, they hired me anyway. And so then I had to go back and tell the folks over at the U.S. Chamber that I was leaving, and it was December '83. So they were just coming up on re-election, and people were saying, well, it's kind of dicey to be going over there just to, the year of a presidential election. You'll be out of a job by the end of the year. And it's like, well, it's a once in a lifetime thing. And even if it's just for a few months, it'll be worth it. So that was the Bushes. George and Barbara Bush went down to South Florida for Christmas, and I flew down on a commercial plane after they had already gone down. And Hector Aristorza, who was one of the White House advance people, picked me up at the airport in Miami and said, well, I'll pick you up in the morning and I'll take you to the Bushes. And that morning we got up and met at a helicopter landing zone at 6 o'clock in the morning. And he flew me out to this island off of South Florida. And Vice President Bush came out and greeted me. And he said, well, welcome, Dave. Glad you're with us. And he said, let me introduce you to Barbara Bush. And we walk into the house where they were staying. And I had breakfast with George and Barbara Bush my first morning on the job. And then he said, well, we have to go up to Miami to do an event, and we have these cigarette race boats. So we're going to drive these cigarette race boats up to Miami. Why don't you get back in the helicopter and take pictures of us as we fly up? Well, I had been a military in the Air Force as a photographer. And so flying in a helicopter with the door open was easy peasy. So we went up the coast of Florida, and I took pictures of them. And we get to the hotel there, and we walk into the hotel suite, and there's all these people, Secret Service and staff people, and his son, Jeb Bush, came by. And Jeb and his wife, Columba, they had just had a baby, Jeb Jr. And Jeb, his son, was bringing little Jebby by to introduce him to his grandfather for the first time. And when that was happening, there were all these people. I noticed everybody was kind of leaving the room, and I was looking around and saying, well, what am I supposed to do? And then that's when the light kind of went off, and it's like, oh, well, if I knew about the history of presidential photographers, and even though I was just with the vice president at that time, I knew like Yoshi Okamoto, who was the first presidential photographer for President Johnson, had total full access, and David Kennerly, who was President Ford's photographer, went everywhere President Ford did, and had complete and total access. So I thought, well, what would David do? And if David were here, he'd go into the suite and take some pictures. So I went into the back room there, and there was the grandfather and the grandson together for the first time with the baby in his arms, and I took some pictures. And of course, at that time I was shooting film, and while I was there, that whole 10 years that I worked at the White House, shot 65,000 rolls of film. But a few weeks later, I got the prints back from the White House Communications Agency Photo Lab that processed all the film and kept the negatives and made prints for us all. And Mrs. Bush saw the photos, and she wrote me a note, said, David, I love those photos you took of Gampy and Jebby. As long as you take pictures of my grandchildren, you can go anywhere and do whatever you want to do. So that was my golden ticket. So from that point on, we wound up going to 75 countries in all 50 states, and I did 2 million miles on Air Force One, and I was with him in the bedroom with his mother when she was on her deathbed, and he wanted one last photo with he and his mother. And when his daughter Doro had a baby, her first baby, Sam LeBlanc, I was there at the nursery taking pictures of the new baby and everything in between. And probably one of the most powerful things when he was vice president was the space shuttle Challenger blowing up, and President Reagan was watching that on TV and immediately called the vice president to go down to Florida and meet with the families. And so we did that. But then being with him on a golf course in Kennebunkport, Maine, where his other home was, I was with him out on the golf course when one of the military aides walked up and interrupted the golf game and said, Mr. President, the Soviet Union has collapsed. And we all kind of looked at each other and was like, wow, what a thing to hear. And now what? And all of his, not long after that, the Berlin Wall came down, and his political people.
Just let me interrupt you. So are there images of these moments?
Well, yeah, I have some here.
Images.
Yeah, and so his political people said, well, you need to go stand on the wall and wave the flag. And he said, it's not our victory, it's their victory. And he was very strong about that. And when he was a little boy, he used to, when he'd play baseball, he would, maybe they'd win a baseball game, and his mother would always say, well, did you congratulate the other team for a game well played? And so he always learned to give the other person credit. So let me see if I can share my screen, and I'll just show you some pictures and continue on with the stories. Let's see.
Great.
Okay, so here's George and Barbara Bush in Houston, Texas, the night that they won the election, and this is in their hotel suite, and they lived there for years.
Вот ты
And
хочешь посмотреть, сейчас идет презентация фотографа в Белом доме.
I didn't catch that. So they're kind of catching the last of the election reviews. The guy on the left, James Baker, went on to become Secretary of State. Now, this is the night that he was vice president. He was elected president, and just off to the president's left, there's a young boy there. That's his grandson, George P. Bush, and George P. Bush today is the land commissioner for the state of Texas, which in Texas is a big deal. And he just announced that he's running for Attorney General of Texas. And the night they won the election, and that's his campaign advisor, Lee Atwater. And then this is the home of the Vice President of the United States. And he had just won the election, and it was going to be his temporary home where he was going to stay until he moved to the White House.
And David, the folks in the shot, is that staff?
They're household staff from the vice president's house. They're all the men in the photo are all military people, Navy people, and the women are their spouses. And except for the one just under the in temporary, just above the OPO, she was Paula Rendon. She helped raise the boys, the Bush boys, as they were growing up, and she taught me how to cook tamales. She was a wonderful person. We had a lot of fun together. And then arriving back at the White House with President Reagan and President-elect Bush. So this is just outside the Oval Office, and in the Rose Garden with President-elect Bush, and on the right side of the images, Vice President-elect Quayle and Marilyn Quayle, and the Reagans on the other side. And then the president-elect usually stays across the street from the White House at the Blair House. And this is the president-elect practicing his campaign, his inaugural address. And you can see the little toys there. So there were always grandchildren around. And then on the north portico of the White House, you know, the Quayles and the Bushes, the Reagans, and saying goodbye. So if you look closely, you see President Reagan and Nancy Reagan holding hands, and you can see that white bandage on the President Reagan's finger. The last night he was president, he broke his finger. And I'll tell you the story about that. See, you can see it there really well. There's a permanent staff that works at the White House, and on inauguration day, the president-elect usually comes to the White House about 10 o'clock in the morning, and they have a little coffee, and then the president and the president-elect get in the motorcade and go up to the Capitol, and then there's a swearing in, there's a lunch, and then the inaugural parade. So there's 5 or 6 hours that the White House is empty, and the staff are all there. They're buffing the floors and changing out the personal items of the new president. And when they had buffed the floors the night before, President Reagan upstairs in the private residence of the White House slipped and broke his finger. And then there they are saying goodbye for the last time. and that's their inaugural parade. And just a sidebar, that building in the background years later went on to become the Trump International Hotel. And the two Georges in the Capitol building. And then when he's elected president, he started building his staff. So here he is down in Florida, and he's offering a job to the gentleman on the left. That's John Sununu, who went on to become chief of staff. And for me, during that transition period, everybody was saying, because I'd been with the vice president 6 years, I said, well, gee, you're going to get hired. There's no doubt about it. And it's like, well, until you get the job offer, yeah, there's doubt about it. And I was fortunate that one night while he was still president-elect, we were in Washington, D.C., and we went to an event at the National Geographic Society, which is downtown Washington, D.C., and we were going to ride back to the vice president's house, and he asked me to ride with him in the vice presidential limo, and he offered me the job to be the president's photographer. And I said, well, that's great. I was kind of hoping for an ambassadorship, but I'll take it. Now this is kind of interesting. This is in the cabinet room, and this is the cabinet photo, but on the first row, that's a row of people seated. The lady in the blue is Elizabeth Dole, and the next person is Senator John Tower of state of Texas, and he was nominated to be Secretary of Defense. And we took the photo because everybody had been selected except for him, and well, he didn't get confirmed, so we had to redo the cabinet photo, and Dick Cheney was selected to be the Secretary of Defense. Now, a funny photography story here is when I'm taking this photo, I'm standing on the desk there, the table for in the cabinet room, and I'm using a Hasselblad camera. So I had the little dark slide, and the camera's on a tripod, and we had it all padded so nothing was touching the table. And I had 12 frames in the roll of film, and I shot the 12 frames, and Susan Biddle, who worked with me, was standing right next to me, and between us, as I was getting ready to change the back to put in another roll of film, we dropped the dark slide, and it plopped down onto the floor and was gone. And so I kind of looked at what I had shot, those 12 photos, those 12 frames, and said, well, we got it. And we went off and we got it. Months later, I'm in the cabinet room shooting a whole nother thing, and I look down on the floor, and on the leg of the cabinet table, there was a little bit of a curve, and there was the dark slide laying on the top of the table leg. It was like horrifying. I nonchalantly bent over and picked it up.
No one ever knew.
And so, Ronald Reagan was in a movie about the Gipper, and when Vice President Bush was, they were running for re-election, Geraldine Ferraro was the first female to be put on a national ticket for Vice President of the United States. And there was all this discussion about, well, how do you prepare? Do you beat her up in a debate, and then you look like you're bad, you don't like women, or how does it work? And there was some anxiety, but at the end of the day, the next day, the New York Post comes out with the headline, George wins one for the Gipper. So I was able to capture that moment.
Excuse me, David, could you just move your mouse because it's in the middle of the pictures? Thank you.
How's that? Okay. And so this is President Carter, Ford, Reagan, Bush, and Nixon. at the opening of the Reagan Presidential Library. And I used to carry, nobody carries as many cameras as Sharon does, but I used to carry two Nikon film cameras and a Leica. And the Leica, I just put black and white in, and we just take snaps every once in a while. I have a whole body of work that what I did in black and white. So this was one of those. And then this is a few minutes later at the same place. It looks like the Oval Office, but it's actually the mock-up of the Oval Office at the Reagan Presidential Library. And they were using this room as a holding room. And George Bush was president. And I said to George Bush, I said, Mr. President, could you turn around for a photo? And when I said that, they all turned, and I got this photo. And it's kind of one of those classic moments that doesn't happen very often. And the fellow on the left is Marlin Fitzwater. He was the press secretary for President Reagan, and only one of two people who ever went on to become press secretary for another president, George Herbert Walker Bush. And the first guy, now I just went blank on his name, was President Kennedy's press secretary. And if somebody remembers his name.
Put it in the chat room.
And then he went on to become the press secretary for a few months for President Johnson.
Any idea what he was saying? Because they're all looking at him like he's got the news of the world.
Well, I think he was telling him, be sure and go to the bathroom before you go outside.
Okay.
And then this is at the opening of the Nixon Presidential Library with President Reagan, Nixon, Bush, and Ford. And this is one of the smaller old Air Force IIs, and we were getting ready to land, and I was just sitting back a couple of rows, and the vice president was pulling on his cowboy boots, and I literally just leaned over and took a snap and got that. So here we are with President Gorbachev up at Camp David, and kind of the behind the scenes story here is the two presidents were at Camp David having nuclear arms discussions, and they had taken a break, and President Gorbachev and his interpreter went for a walk. And so I went with them, and we got to the horseshoe pit, and they were having a discussion in the interpreter where they were going back and forth about, well, what is this? And so I went over and I showed Gorbachev how to play horseshoes. And so he picked up the horseshoe and he threw the first shoe and got a ringer on the first throw. So he went over and he got the horseshoe and he kept it. So I said, well, wait a minute. So I went and told on him. I told the president, I said, hey, the head commie just stole your horseshoe. So that night at dinner, the president, Camp David is a military base, and there's a lot of people that live out there all the time. And they took one of the horseshoes and framed it up that night. And at dinner, the president presented the framed horseshoe to President Gorbachev. But that was a lot of fun. And another sidebar to that, a lot of other countries have head of state photographers. Sharon and I were presidential photographers, but not every country does, but some do. And they used to, when we would be at a World Leaders Summit somewhere, if I walked across the room, I'd have 5 or 6 photographers. The other presidential photographers follow me because they would say, well, if the presidential guy can go over there from the United States, we can go, even though we're from Italy or wherever. And so they used to joke and call me the photographic Supreme Allied Commander U.S. And we used to stamp the back of our photos with our names, and because we would make prints in those days. And the very first day I was president's photographer, and we were making some of the first prints. My staff made a rubber stamp that said Photo General of the United States. And they stamped a bunch of photos. And I was like, wait a minute, you can't do that. And Boris Yeltsin, who we had met with in communist, in the Soviet Union before he became the leader of Free Russia. And President Gorbachev on a Russian ship off the coast of Malta. We went to Malta to meet with Gorbachev, and we were on a Navy ship, and they were on a Russian battleship, and there was a huge storm that day, and so much so that the ships had to be anchored in full steam ahead just to stay even, and Gorbachev refused to come over to our ship, so we had to go to his, and President Bush was an avid boater person, and I said, well, we can go, but the swells would go up and down and up and down, and when the swells would kind of meet, we'd step over onto the small boat and go down, and then the next one come up, the next guy I'd get on, go down, and we would go over, and but the only good thing about that is that because Gorbachev didn't come to our ship, I was able to have his Maine lobster dinner that they were going to serve him, but I got to have that night. So Vice President Bush goes to communist Poland and meets with shipyard worker Lech Walesa, and Lech Walesa said, someday you, George Bush, will be president of the United States, and someday Poland will be free. Well, George Bush was elected president, and we went back to meet with President Lech Walesa in a free Poland. And this is in downtown Gdańsk, Poland. And it was really a special moment. And as a photographer, to have been there in communist Poland and then to go to a free Poland was an amazing experience. And then Margaret Thatcher over number 10 Downing Street, and Nelson Mandela. What a great thrill and honor to have a chance to meet him. And then up at Camp David, on the left is Colin Powell, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and in the red shirt is Jim Baker, Secretary of State, and Dick Cheney, Secretary of Defense, Vice President Quayle, Brent Scowcroft, the National Security Advisor. On the right is the Chief of Staff, John Sununu, and this was after Iraq invaded Kuwait, and there were a lot of high-level meetings that I was lucky enough to be in and photograph, and this one was at Camp David. And President Bush started every cabinet meeting with a prayer, and out of respect for that, he always believed in his family, his faith, and his friends, and so he would start every cabinet meeting with a prayer. But this one was just before the beginning of the first Gulf War, so I took the photo of his cabinet praying. And then he was one of the youngest Navy fighter pilots in World War II. He was shot down. He lost 2 of his crew members, and now he's commander-in-chief, and he's getting ready to send people off to war. And he was on the South Lawn a few hours before the beginning of the Gulf War, and I went with him and got this snap. But he really didn't want to go to war. And a funny sidebar, he was practicing a speech in the Oval Office, addressing Saddam Hussein and telling him, well, you need to pull out of Kuwait by 12 noon at such and such a date. And this was in the practice. And I turned to the speechwriter and I said, well, so is that 12 noon DC time or Baghdad time? And the speechwriter went pale and he said, oh, let me go change it. And so that was my one little contribution to history there. And then once the bombing started in Baghdad, the president was on the phone with world leaders and congressional leadership. But you can see the typewriter. He typed thousands of notes to a lot of people, and was always very gracious, saying thank you. But he typed with 2 fingers. And then, in the Oval Office, just some of the planning meetings, and upstairs in the private residence of the White House with Colin Powell briefing him on the Gulf War maneuvers, and another funny sidebar story. Dick Cheney comes over as Secretary of Defense to brief the president on the troop movements, and the president said, "Well, let's go upstairs to the private residence and let's meet." Well, Cheney had brought a bunch of his staff people over from the Pentagon, and when the president said, "Let's go upstairs," Cheney said to his staff, "Well, just wait here. I'll just go upstairs." And so they go up, and they're sitting there in the living room, and Cheney's briefing the president, and the president says, "Well, do you have a map?" And well, he did have a map, but it was downstairs. Well, right on the coffee table, right in front of him that week, Time magazine had done a fold out of Iraq and Kuwait. And so, as a presidential photographer, I had never got involved in anything, but I just leaned over and I opened up the magazine, and the president saw the map, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about it, Dick. I have a map right here." Well, 2 or 3 years ago, I was with Dick Cheney, and I was telling him that story, and he said, I kept that magazine, and I used it several other times for briefings because it was nice and small.
So, David,
Yeah.
as this process is going on and we're getting closer and closer to going to war, right? Can you convey, the feeling that's going on in these rooms day after day?
Well, as the photographer, well, I guess all the presidential photographers, I would get 3 schedules. I would get what they call a block schedule, which was like a monthly schedule. And it would say, the second week in the month, we're going to go to here and there, and, Chicago or Denver or someplace. And then the next calendar you get would be a weekly schedule, and that would be a lot tighter. And it would say, well, Monday morning we're going to have a cabinet meeting, and we're going to have a congressional meeting, and we're going to meet Miss Watermelon or whatever it was. And then every day get a little booklet, and it was the minute by minute of everything that the president was going to do that day. And like I said, I was shooting film, so that line at 7 a.m. CIA briefing would be a roll of film, and it would be a roll of film only if it was just the president and CIA briefer, just a couple of photos and you're done. But if the chief of staff or somebody else would come in during that meeting, then the meeting changed and you would document that. So building up to the beginning of the war, the schedule just said like private time, and there was nothing on the schedule. But I knew because the front people in the Oval Office would call me up and say, well, the Cheney's coming, or the CIA guy's coming, or whoever was coming, and there would be these meetings and these briefings, but there was nothing really on the schedule. And this is really funny, but one of those nights we were just kind of literally waiting around. It was 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and in the White House they have what they call the White House mess, and it's dining room, and I wanted to get dinner, so I thought, well, I'll just eat at the White House mess. So I walked over to just down the hall from my office. My office was physically in the White House, kind of at the bottom of a stairway there. And around the corner was the National Security Advisor's office. And so I went over, and it was Brent Scowcroft. And I walked into Brent's office, and I said, hey, Brent, you want to go down to the White House mess and have dinner? Well, while we were doing this, ABC News is live. We've all seen the reporters from the White House with the White House in the background, giving all their, knowledge of stuff that they know nothing about. but they talk like they do, and they're going on about this stuff. And Britt Hume from ABC News sees me in the window in Brent Scowcroft's office, who's the national security advisor. And so live on television, I'm standing in the middle of Brent Scowcroft's office, and I hear on the TV, David Valdez, the president's photographer, is in with Brent Scowcroft right now. So the president and the national security advisor must be meeting right now. And I turned around, it's like, what? We're just going to dinner. And so from that moment on, whenever those guys are standing on the White House saying whatever they're saying, I don't believe a thing they say. But anyways, so Colin Powell, the president, having been in the military, having, kind of lived through the Vietnam era, where the politicians ran the Vietnam War, President Bush said, let the generals do it. And Norman Schwarzkopf was in charge of the World Coalition. And it was very easy for the president to pull together the World Coalition because in his resume, he had been one of the youngest Navy fighter pilots in World War II. He'd been an oil man. He'd been a congressman. He'd been the head of the Republican Party, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, the ambassador to the United Nations, a congressman, a vice president of the United States, and then commander in chief. So through all those years, he met all these people all over the world. So now as the leader of the free world, he's picking up the phone calling Hosni Mubarak and Margaret Thatcher and Mitterrand and everybody and saying, you need to join us in this effort to remove Iraq from Kuwait. And he put Norman Schwarzkopf in charge. And within a short period of time, months, that the Iraq was removed from Kuwait. And here's Colin Powell on the phone with Norman Schwarzkopf telling him the war is over.
Before you move on to another picture, can you talk about why are there drawers on both sides of the desk?
Well, no particular reason. You can see that the president has a phone that he's using, and then there's some other stuff on there. And see that little box right there in the middle? That's actually a Weems and Plath clock. My wife actually used to make those clocks, and right next to that is a little American flag. And during the Bush presidency, the United States went into Panama and removed Manuel Noriega out of Panama. And some troops were injured, and one of the U.S. Marines gave President Bush that little flag and said, thank you for being president. But it's just a design. I think there's a story about the Resolute desk and how it was made from a battleship, and so there's just I don't know that this is that desk. But the drawer and the phone in there is really just a space saver. It's not like the bat phone or anything. And then he was an avid sportsman, so just playing tennis out the White House, and we used to go hunting all the time down in Beeville, Texas. This is a funny story. So the guy on the left is the head of the pro bass fishing tournament, and we're at his house down in Georgia, and we're on his lake. It's a small lake, and press are 30, 40 feet away, and making noise and carrying on, and they wouldn't go until he caught a fish. So Ray Scott, the gentleman in the cowboy hat, had taken a fish out of his house and put it in the boat. And you can see on the bottom of the fish, there's that little metal box there. That's actually a mounted fish. And the president lifted that fish up. The press got their photo and they all went away. And that's his daughter, Doro, up in Kennebunkport, Maine. and down in Florida fishing. I was Boat Fidelity. And this I shot, just being out there, and then it wound up on the cover of Newsweek magazine. And then
Wow.
Ted Williams and Joe DiMaggio. And right over there is the baseball that they just signed for me, so that was great. And then this, I shot for Life magazine, I talked to Bobby Baker Burrows, the photo editor at Life, and she wanted some pictures of the family, and I talked to Barbara Bush, and Mrs. Bush suggested that I come over and early in the morning, so I went over, and it was just the president, Mrs. Bush in bed, and the grandchildren came in, and now the two little girls, that's Barbara and Jenna Bush. Yeah, Jenna Bush is on Today Show or one of those, so I wound up shooting the photo, and then it ran 2 full pages in Life magazine, and then it ran in the Best of Life and Classic Moments of Life, and the Best of Life for the past 75 years, and I was just going through some of my stuff the other day, and saw the thank you letter from President Bush for doing that. And then this is cooking tamales up at their house in Kennebunkport. I was always there, and the president, the Today Show did a story about me one time, and was doing a feature story, and they interviewed him, and he said that he and Mrs. Bush considered me a part of their family. And, I always, that was nice, but I always respected the fact that I was an employee, a staff person, but it was my job that put me there. Now, not too long before this photo was made, George and Jeb and I were in the kitchen, George W. Bush and Jeb and I were in the kitchen eating tamales right out of that pot. And Barbara Bush came in, and she slammed her hand on the table right there. And she said, "I don't feed animals in my house." And I was like horrified. And so we all had to move over, sit down at the table and eat. President-elect Clinton being greeted by President Bush just outside the Oval Office. And the last day George Bush was president of the United States. And you can see that little box there. You hit that button, and the steward will come in and bring breakfast or coffee or whatever. And the next morning when he woke up, he was a former president and down in Houston, Texas. And he woke up and he reached over and he was looking for the button, and there was no button to touch. And Mrs. Bush said, "George, from now on, you have to make your own coffee." And then leaving that last day.
David, if you could share what that felt like, in that room. I've lost the election and now I'm going.
Well, so for me, like from this photo in the morning to this photo, about 1 o'clock, I also lost my job. And it was like, well, now what? He's okay. And what am I going to do? And I was fortunate. I went on to head up photography for the Walt Disney Company. I mean, that's why you see the Disney stuff back here. And that's a whole nother part of my life that I did. And arriving back in Houston, and then I got back on that 747. I was on the inaugural flight when they first got that plane. And then on the last flight, and I flew back in the plane empty, went back to the White House in a White House car, and turned in my cameras and dropped off my ID badge. And I literally turned the light switches off in the lower White House hallway there. And Bob McNeely and Sharon and all of them had come in and moved into my spot. And that's the cover of my book. And then the two presidents. And actually, George W. just lives up the street from here. I'm in Georgetown, Texas. He's in Crawford. It's about 30 minutes from here. And there we are together. That's me on the right. And about 4 or 5 years ago. And then them going away for the last time. And now it's Sharon's turn. Unless anybody has any questions.
Just great, David. That is a beautiful, beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
The tidbits of information are really, really, so striking. God, I mean, and when you think back of all the pieces of history that those guys went through, is really, it's really fascinating. Really fascinating. So thank you very, very much. If anyone has any questions, now would be the time, to throw anything your way. And if we can take maybe a 2-minute break, and then we'll get the lady on. We'll get Ms. Farmer on, and here. So David, thank you so much. That was great.
And
Really
thank you.
appreciate you doing that.
So are there questions? Can we have questions?
Yeah, yes.
Good questions.
Fire away.
Question, I just wanted to say thank you because
Yes,
you
absolutely.
humanized him, you made him into a human being from being the president and all that he went through. So thank you.
Yeah,
And the pictures are beautiful.
it was really interesting. The kind of the people that he impacted in his lifetime. He had a really good friend, Jerry Weintraub. Jerry was a
Entertainment.
film producer,
Right.
and he was Jewish, and this club wouldn't let him join. This was maybe in the 60s or so, and George Bush quit. He said, "Well, if my friend Jerry Weintraub can't do this, neither will I." And that was kind of the way he was with his friends, and he was such a warm, compassionate guy. And I saw him cry a lot of times, and we used to kind of tease about that. But say, well, we'd go into something like, when the Challenger blew up, we had to go down there. I mean, it was not pretty, and when we visited Auschwitz, I personally was impacted by that in a huge way, and had nightmares about that for years, and don't really much talk about it. But when you see the things that he did, and the notes that he would write, I mean, you can talk to almost any famous person from those times, or we were at the United Nations one time at a World Leaders Conference, and we're walking down this hallway with hundreds of people, and off to the side was this janitor with a mop, kind of getting out of the way. And when he was the ambassador to the United Nations, he recognized that guy, and he walked over there as president of the United States and greeted that guy, shook his hand, and knew him by name. And everybody was kind of shocked that the president of the United States would do that. But we were at another one, we were in, I think it was at NATO, and there was this reception, and there were all these people, and this lady walks up to President Bush, and she didn't know him. And she says, "Oh, well, where are you from?" He says, "Well, the United States." And she says, "Oh, well, what do you do?" And he said, "Well, I'm president of the United States." And she just turned around and walked away like, "I'm never going to talk to anybody ever again."
That's great. That's a great story. So David, at some point, do you stop pinching yourself, with like this journey you found yourself on?
Sharon and I, we've truly been blessed in our lives, and to have an opportunity. In the history of the United States, there's only been 12 people that have done this, and Sharon and I are 2 of those 12, and a couple have passed away already. And so it's a small group of people, and we may come at things different politically, but we're there to document history, and whatever it is, like that picture I shot of them in bed with the grandchildren. His hair was all messed up because they literally woke up. Had I gone in there and said, "Oh, comb your hair," it wouldn't have been a real photo. And that's what we did. And it's funny. When I left, I wound up. Well, get this. Literally, my first paid gig after leaving the White House was photographing a birthday party for a 16-year-old girl. But then, a month or so later, I went to head up photography for the Walt Disney Company, and that's actually where I made the switch from film to digital. It's funny. It's rare that anybody ever asked me about my Disney experience because they don't see what
We
it
don't
is.
know.
But we used to have to create. We would go into these creative meetings, and they would say, "Well, we're going to launch Disney Cruise Line, but the cruise line doesn't exist. But we need to have a photo of it," and that's where we got into the whole digital imaging thing and photographing models. I've got some stuff here of little models of the Disney Cruise Line ships and just random things that we would photograph, and we'd photograph parts of things. We built the Boardwalk Resort Hotel one time when that was first being built, and we went to the Imagineers and said, "Well, gee, there's a brick wall and there's shingles on the roof. Well, where can we find those around Walt Disney World?" And we'd go photograph that and put it all together. And then it was like when we would have these creative meetings, they would say, "Well," one guy one time said, "Well, we need to think out of the box." And the response was, "At Disney, we don't have a box." And I would get calls at 9, 10 o'clock at night on Saturday night and say, "Well, I was thinking about blah, blah, blah. What are your thoughts?" And it's like you'd never thought about it. They just wanted they just wanted that
Constant flow.
streaming out of you. And so it was dramatically different. But I'll never forget my first assignment at Disney was a National Teachers Award. And it was a big black tie event at the Contemporary Hotel in Walt Disney World in Florida. And all this Disney entertainment. And at the end of the event, people in their tuxedos walk into this room. And there's Mickey Mouse in a tuxedo, and they're walking into the room and they're saying, "Oh, I get my picture with Mickey Mouse." And my head's kind of spinning because it's like a few months earlier, people were walking into the room and saying, "Oh, I get my picture with the President of the United States." And it's like,
There you go.
So I'm really curious about the dividing line between the pictures that you took as the White House photographer and what you were taking for yourself, what you got to keep. I know that a lot of this stuff is property of the government of the United States. Did you carry another camera with you if you wanted to take pictures? And did you have to turn those over? I mean, are you totally on company time, or were you allowed to express yourself photographically?
Yeah, no. It was, in my case, I don't know what the others did, but everything belongs to the federal government. You're a government employee. The film belongs to them. The cameras belong to them. The images belong to them. My images are all now managed by the U.S. Archives. And President Bush had expressed early on, there was a guy in the Reagan White House who quit, and he wrote a kind of a kiss and tell book. And he was just really upset that, a staff person would write a book. So the idea of like writing notes or taking personal photos, a lot of people would take pictures of me, and say, "Well, you must never get your picture with the president." And they'd send me, so I got stacks of pictures of me with the president. But no, even when I published my book, I donated all the profits to the Bush Presidential Library because I just didn't want to have I didn't need it. I didn't need to make money. It was just kind of a fun thing to do. I know some of the presidential photographers have gone on to do some great things, and good for them. That just wasn't me, and I didn't need it.
Do you have total access to the pictures?
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, if you want to,
yeah.
at any time, you can go in, and if you want to make a print for yourself, you could
Ev-
do that.
everybody in the United States has access to it.
Right.
Because it's all public domain. So you can go to the U.S. Archives and get the photos that Neil Armstrong shot on the moon because he was a government employee, and some of Ansel Adams' photos when he did some work for the Department of Interior, they're public domain. Dorothea Lange,
All that book, A Vision Shared.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I have a ton of that work. And
Yeah.
when that book first came out, the prints were $2.50 a piece.
Yeah,
When I bought them, they were 65. I mean, that's maybe
Yeah.
20 years. Maybe now they're over 100. But we, like you say, David, we own them all.
yeah. So they belong to the public. Now, if you go and you wanted to order some scans, they'd probably charge you $5 or $10. When I go over there, they don't charge me anything, but I'm a nice guy.
Well, that's good.
You throw out a secret. That's
Yeah,
where our
yeah.
government waste is, David. You're not paying your share.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you very, very much. We all appreciate that. So
Just wait till you hear Sharon. Sharon is wonderful.
well, that's why we've got her. So let's just take like a 2-minute break if anyone has to run to the boys or girls room, and we'll be right back with Ms. Farmer. Thanks, David.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you.
All right, Jay, let's get Sharon up, and we're ready to go.
She's all set whenever she's ready.
Okay. Big veggie chips.
Yo, Jay.
Hey, Sharon.
So should I go ahead and share the screen and then call it up?
Sure. Let's give it a shot.
Share. So share screen first before I hit Photo Mechanic, right?
Correct.
Okay, share screen. And then Photo Mechanic.
There we go.
Okay. Soon as the spinning wall of death will stop here. Here we go. Now, image. Slideshow.
Okay.
Are we ready?
We are. I want to thank Sharon for coming in and presenting as well. I suggest everyone put their seatbelt on, and off we go. Sharon, the stage is yours, dear.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Frank. And thank you, Jay. And David, you know I love you, brother. Because before me, there was David. He set great examples of how to do your JOB. And just because it's photography doesn't mean you play it lightweight. We all start somewhere. And for me, the photojournalism experience started at Ohio State. And I was a member of Our Choking Times. To go from that to this guy, this is the last place on earth I'm looking for a job in federal government, because I live in Washington, D.C., and we can't vote. We don't have a congressperson. We don't have a senator. And we put more money in the tax revenue fund than 27 states put together. So what do I really think? Yeah, this is the last plantation. So Our Choking Times was in a corner in the back, and you couldn't have found it without that sign. So I ended up working for a guy who embraces all cultures, all kind of ways of thinking, and he reads a lot. This guy loves history. He loves culture. And for us to go to this unknown spot on Ohio State's campus, this is the back of a gymnasium. That's the only space we could get. And we put a paper out once a month for 3 years that I was there. And we had a small staff, but we made it work. The fun thing about photography for me is you can see the results soon, and you can get the reaction of people who read sooner. And so I began to cover the demonstrations on campus because it's activity. Plus I get to document, which makes me love history even more, because now we're talking my history. This guy here was mentored to more than 15 groups on campus. A lot of administrators and teachers get lazy. They just want to do their job and go home. This is Charles Chuck Williams. He was an assistant dean of students, and he took care to make sure everybody was going to be all right. So because of that, I took pictures. This is Mike White on the left, and he is now president of the undergraduate student body. The guy on the right is Matt. He was a dentistry major. These two were the president and vice president of student government. So we're talking about unity on campus between Black folk and white folk. To keep the dialogue going, they talked me into running for vice president and for Dennis Sargent, who was a real sergeant, to be the president. And we won. I wasn't trying to win, but we won. And we worked well together because, as they say, ebony and ivory know how to get along. Years later, Mike White, who was the president of student government, is now the mayor of Cleveland, Ohio. And we are in Cleveland, Ohio to inaugurate the new Indian baseball stadium in Cleveland. When I leave Ohio State after having an internship at the Associated Press, I come back to Washington, D.C., and I start working in a camera store. And I met a group who was looking for a new photographer for their next album cover. I got the job. Bernice Johnson Reagan asked me why I wasn't working for myself. So I quit my camera store job and started freelancing for a little bit of everybody, including the Washington Post. Sweet Honey in the Rock grows, and they begin to sing around the world, and they keep using me as their photographer for their PR pictures. The more photography you do, no matter what kind of photography you're doing, you get better at what you're doing. You even outgrow your own apartment and you begin to get a studio to do your work in. And meanwhile, the same people who told you how good you are still telling you that. And as they grow, so do I. And when you start to make good contacts with great people, one good thing does lead to another. It really is about the company you keep and the spirit you hold. This is Bernice Reagan and her daughter, Toshi. Bernice left the group about 10 years ago, and she and Toshi started to perform together. They've done 2 operettas based on the work of the science fiction writer, Octavia Butler. 2 weeks ago, Bernice's daughter, Toshi, got a music grant from Alpert, who plays the trumpet, Herb Alpert, for $150,000 just to do her work in music. If you take great pictures, people hire you to do other things. So I always try to find things that are effective. This girl is so bad, even her chorus mates were like astounded at what she was blowing out. We are a community in Washington, D.C. And some of us, when they die, we don't want to be in a hearse. Walk me through the streets where I grew up at, where I worked at, where my church is. And these are 3 street musicians leading this guy's casket for 2.5 miles from Harvard Street on 14th in DC down to Newton and 16th. I also did stuff for groups of people who sang and performed. Always try to make sure my photo credit was there because nobody's gonna know who shot that badass photo if your name's not on it. So I always insist no matter what, where's my photo credit? Where's it gonna be? Because if you don't guarantee your credit, believe me, nobody else will either. The fun thing about photography is projects. Songs of My People is where this photo comes from, shot outside in Brentwood, DC, Maryland. And I had gone to California to shoot for this project, but the pictures that made the book in my backyard. And she says, girl, I'd have rode my bicycle for you, but I fell 2 weeks ago and my hip's still bothering me. At this point, I'm thinking she's 87 years old. I found out later that she was really like 90, 91. So to go to work for him, we from DC, we don't expect to work for government. Our parents did because they had a different upbringing than us. I'm from the movement of Funkadelic, War, Temptations, Motown. My head's in a different direction, but I love jazz, I love chess. But to end up working for him was really like what we call cool beans. Plus here is history for real. They're having discussions about all kinds of things popping off in the world. You can't even get Netanyahu and Nasser Arafat to sit down and talk together. So here, everybody's sitting down for lunch. They unfolded their napkins. They look like they're gonna talk and they got stuff to talk about. Next thing I know, President Clinton and the King of Jordan are getting up, folding their napkins up. And they say, you guys stay here. We'll be back later. They made the security for all them leave. Secret Service helped them get out the library. And then they put people outside the door telling everybody, you can't go in. They had to talk. The decision process.
Well,
Whatever.
Sharon,
Uh-huh.
let me just interrupt you. Did you know that that was going to happen?
No,
No. Okay.
no. You just got to react. You just got to know what you got to do. That's the other fun about it's like being on a hot tub and you don't know where the hottest part is, but it's there. But you have to be prepared. When David was joking about me carrying a whole lot of cameras, oh yeah, because sometimes you may get stuck in a spot and can't move because you know how sensitive the atmosphere and you can hear what's being said. And if I got the right camera lens on me, it don't matter where I get stuck. I'm gonna wait my time, but I'm gonna use one of those cameras that are gonna be the perfect size lens I need for what I want with impact. Because the things we discussed, even the things we could have fun with. This is at the 50th anniversary of NATO that was hosted in Washington, DC. And here we have, hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. On the far right-hand side is the Cheshire Cat himself, the National Security Advisor, who's in charge of all this stuff too. And he's grinning like a Cheshire Cat because the things that go on to make diplomacy work, some days it's just so rough you would not believe it. Other days you're like, really? That's all it took? Things go from yin to yang in a heartbeat. When staff members leave that we love and we're gonna miss them, yeah, we have a little party for them. My best ride is always in the helicopter. This is in Kissimmee, Florida, after the hurricane had hit down there. So I'm watching the president's chopper fly over. So I'm on another helicopter. Here we're meeting about what to do about the next trouble coming. And he's always got folks around him giving advice, from the State Department, Madeleine Albright, to his press guy, Mike McCurry in front. On the far side is William Christopher, who was Defense Secretary. There are things that had to be decided, and it can't get decided in a vacuum. It can't wait because everybody now operates on a 24-hour clock. Even when you think you sleep, you're gonna get a phone call. After an event, we all go back into the White House together. This is meeting with Vietnam for the first time after we left Vietnam. And this led to a trip a year and a half later for us to go to Vietnam, as they were still trying to retrieve the bodies in the aircraft of the people who had been shot down in Vietnam. We went to Mother Teresa's funeral in India. I mean, I thought Haiti was poor. I think parts of America are terribly poor, Appalachia terribly. But let me just say, where India is, they need help. It can't be left like this. The poverty level is everywhere. The caste system is prejudice. It's against all people who aren't rich and light skinned. We get tired too on planes because we've traveled all the time. As we begin to close out our era of 8 years in the Clinton White House, I began to take group shots of the different departments. And where better to do it but on the back steps of the White House? The plane ride, the helicopter, his limo, it weighs a lot, but it's part of the ritual of what we do when we land and when we depart. Here we are in Texas, and the young lady is the daughter of James Byrd, who was dragged by his neck until his body separated. She tried to meet Bush. She tried to meet the mayors and governors and legislative members of the Texas folk, but they wouldn't meet with her. She wanted to talk about a hate crime bill. But President Clinton came and he just hugged her as she cried. Ghana, hey, a lot of people showed up, and I'm thrilled to death because here you got 2 white people wearing kente cloth. You better believe I got pride. I got pride. Everybody gets their own interpreter, so no one will misunderstand what got said or what was understood. So the 2 ladies have one, they just listen to those conversations, and the 2 guys, same conversations, but different. And you don't want to miss the nuances because you don't want to have people misunderstand what you really mean. We're always meeting before we have the bigger meeting because things have to be laid out. Yes, she did those things she probably wasn't thrilled about with flowers and what's the place setting going to be. But Mrs. Clinton was a pistol. She was very adept at being a health advocate and women's rights. And this little stuff here with this foo-foo flower and what's the table gonna look like? Oh yeah, we're gonna make sure it's pretty for you. But that's not her first love. A lot of things we did together sometimes, especially when it was about some fun stuff like maybe her birthday. This is the Delancey sisters up in Mount Vernon, New York. They had written a book called Having Our Say. And at the time they were both 100, one was 104 and the other 102. And they had been school teachers and one a dentist. And seeing them was like, wow. And I'm like, y'all are so tough. And they're looking at me going, look, sister, they got a colored photographer. And I said to myself, you're talking about me. Oh, I've never seen one before, oh Lord. He was an avid golfer, still is an avid golfer. I was golfing before I got to the White House. I love golf. When he says he was going golfing, it's great. If he tried to handle me his club, I wouldn't take it. I'm left-handed, and he's right-handed golfer. Sometimes no matter what speech is written, he's rewriting it. He thinks a lot. He reads a lot. He asks a lot of questions. Our meetings go long and may move from one room up to the residence, but the meetings continue. And of course, Socks became DCAT. And Buddy became D-Dog. This is a snowstorm in DC. Everybody shut down but the photography and the military people. Here we're getting ready for the final cabinet shot. Because the original one was done inside the cabinet, I thought we should do one outside the cabinet. It took the usher's office, Secret Service, the executive leadership of the White House to help this thing get planned. Everybody had to be on board for this to work. The other thing about having cameras is if you have a wide lux camera, you get to shoot panorama stuff. It gives you a better idea of the atmosphere of the room. Hey, I carry gear because I don't want to get stuck and not have enough stuff to get me out of whatever trouble I think I'm in because I can't get that picture. I can get any picture. You take a 300, you take a 15 to 35, you take a 24 to 70, you take a 70 to 150, 200, and you got a 300 2.8, not to mention a 1.4 and a 2x teleconverter. You can't get in any trouble. And if you have to be really quiet, I got 2 Leicas there too. I know how to be like quiet. And I like wearing dark colors because you forget I'm in the room. So is there life after the White House? Oh, hell yeah. because if you do good at what you do, you're gonna like everything. And everything brings something different to the table. I love musicians. I love jazz. This is Davey Yarborough, who just retired as jazz in charge at Duke Ellington School for the Arts. This is his wife, Esther. They got their own group that sings and plays and does everything. I love basketball, especially women's basketball, because it's just fierce. Plus, if I get that Sports Illustrated shot, it just adds to what I can do as a photographer. Every photographer needs to love everything, because the more you shoot, the better you get at whatever you're trying to do. If you sit and watch TV, if you do nothing but read books and you don't go out and shoot something, you are missing what this life can be and how great it is. Believe me, it's a cool life, because censorship in our lives can affect what we do, can affect what we see. If we think no one is listening, that no one cares, we turn to other forms of salvation. Because if we die a noble death, we will not be forgotten. In hope, we can find solace, be it with one, or with two, or with the crowd. As we listen to each other, we must march, we must act, we must vote, so that we, all of us, might stand for something, do something with our education and do something. Thank you all.
Wow. So, Sharon, that is an incredible body of work. I mean, can you give us a sense of what type of guy Clinton was, and what the camaraderie between him and Gore, things like that? Because that's always like peeling back the onion for us is always sort of interesting, things that we wouldn't normally know. What Hillary and the influence Hillary had, on his presidency.
Hillary and Gore probably had the most influence on his presidency. When we were having serious discussions, no matter what it was, if the two of them came to the same meeting that the cabinet was at, or the staff that was going to implement a policy or was working on overhauling a policy, and especially when it came to the healthcare and to the union issues about how to support people who wanted unions, as the legs were getting taken out from the unions by the people who own the companies. There was camaraderie that was very strong about what to do about that. And they wouldn't meet just about it once a month. Every other day they'd meet about it and see where things were. So I learned what being intense was, because the things that kept coming up over and over again were not resolved. They had another thought about what direction things should go in. It was a pretty good crew, given all the diversity that we had in thoughts and opinions. And if you didn't offer something that was going to make people think, he'd ask you, what are you thinking? I haven't heard from you. And he'd invite people to talk to him with everybody present about, and then we'd have nice arguments. It's like being in court, but you're talking about why one thing ought to happen one way as opposed to another.
So you mentioned that, and David, you may want to jump in here too. The images that end up getting released, right, are, they have a certain thread. But to your point, Sharon, there's arguing and there's bickering back and forth. And I'm sure there's imagery that, exists on those meetings. Is that for you guys a bit frustrating that we don't see that piece of it?
No, because at some point you will. I may be dead, but you're going to see it, because the bottom line is it's all there. We didn't hold anything back from what we shot. It's all in the National Archives or in the Presidential Library.
Yeah, I'm not saying what you shot, but I'm just saying the press room releasing those images of Bill or George,
That's
yelling at somebody.
That's all the press gets to see. You got inside people. That's what I'm in there for. I'm in there sworn to secrecy. I'm in there sworn not to talk about the issues. And I don't. It's fun reading the newspaper and they'll say so-and-so said this. And you're like, they wasn't even there. And then they say, and then she said this. And I'm like, she didn't say nothing. So I knew that the press could only get hearsay. And I have been in too many meetings where they say, yeah, this one went down. No, it didn't. We ain't talking about that at all. So
you guys may be the photographers in the room, may be the first witnesses to fake news.
we don't know who's faking it. You know, it's certainly not us. You
Right,
know,
I know that.
honest brokers or what. But people who make fake news have ulterior motives.
Right.
And they are all dishonest, just like the media is when they hype stuff up like it's a damn soapbox opera day after day after day. Meanwhile, people are still living in poverty. Transit systems still don't work. COVID is still raging. And what do we want to pretend? I don't think so. Photojournalists are not into pretension. Photographers are not into pretension. You're about what you see is what you get.
Right.
And if you don't go, you can't get. If you don't go, you don't see. If you don't have physical, visible evidence that something went down, I mean, really, I'm supposed to believe you and not my own eyes? I don't think so. And all Photoshop did, as well as what I call the glam community, is make everybody want to be Beverly Hills 10, whatever that program was. Everybody wants to be rich, but they don't want to work at it unless you happen to be born with a golden spoon, or otherwise you're an artist. You're a struggling photographer. You're a struggling photojournalist. You're a struggling writer. You're trying to make your mark in the world because you're not taking life in like it's television. Now, those are the people I admire.
There you go. Anyone have any questions to throw out? You know, we could open up the room. Jay, open up everyone's phone if anyone wants to throw out a question to Sharon or David, if anyone has.
Gotta have questions. This lifestyle is much to be living for.
Mm. And so, I mean, do you guys actually remember the transition from, you know, one group to the next? Like, do you remember how David was helpful to you, Sharon?
David has always been helpful to me and for me. The longer you know somebody, the more you love them. It's the nature of being a very small, closed club, not on purpose, but it's the nature of the jobs we've held. And anybody can aspire to this. You just have to spend more time around people who are politicians. You have to go to rallies. You have to be working for a candidate. So you figure out who's in charge of what, or who helps make decisions about who works on a campaign. We don't come out of a vacuum. We've done many, many things that lead us on the trail that we don't know we're looking for until the offer is made. And you're like, huh? You talking to me? Really? So there's nothing like a surprise, nothing.
And so you covered Clinton for 4 years, right?
8.
You did the whole 8 years.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Wow. So, I mean, can you give us a sense of, you know, the craziness of the whole Monica thing and all of that? Like, you know, what was that like in the room?
I have no comment about that because
Okay.
everybody is about examining that to death.
Right.
I
Okay.
got no opinion.
Okay. And like the Camp David meetings or the Ireland peace deal, you know, things like that.
You
know,
learn that people have vested interest in why war should go on. You learn that war goes on because the people in charge of their government do better with war than they do with peace. And war stops people from making demands on their government to do the right thing. We watched things come unraveled at Camp David because people on some sides were scared of losing their position, either in Palestine or in Israel, about what they're in charge of. The vested interest does not lie with freedom or fairness. It lies with control and power. I can't wait to hope that things get better between Palestine and Israel. It's been really terrible to watch how many people die all the time. And how many weapons does everybody need to blow us all to smithereens? I don't know about you guys, but I read a lot of science fiction. After having had hope in the Star Trek years and to see where we are now, this is crazy, y'all. We need more arts programs, more education. School needs to be open 24 hours a day so you can learn a trade. Some teachers don't want to teach in the daytime. They rather teach in the evening. The kids rather go to school in the evening. But that's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with destruction, climate change. A lot of people have COVID and haven't gotten the shots. I don't want to be a oops. I still wear my mask everywhere.
All right, there you go. Well, David, any words?
Well, I loved seeing Sharon's photos. That was great. There were some classics in there. Those two guys sitting on the chairs underneath that sign, the black and white, was like showstopper for me.
Yeah.
You know, Sharon is always right in terms of how you interact with other people, and as a photographer, you know, you're always like, you can never stop learning. I don't hesitate. I lead some photo walks, and people will show up and say, "Oh, well, I do this, this, and that," and it's like, "Oh, I didn't know that," or "Let me try that," and I'm always putting myself out there. I just got put on the Georgetown, Texas Arts and Culture Board, and now I'm involved with not only do I do the photography festival, I manage that, but I do the art. I'm involved with the art festival and the Georgetown Film Festival. I've been viewing films, and but the best part about that is just that I'm keeping myself current, keeping myself out there, and when you do that, I can't tell you how many other assignments I've, paid gigs I get from doing that, and being kind and courteous to people, because people remember that kind of stuff, and they say, well, maybe I like something that this guy did over here, or that person did over there, but I know that guy is gonna get me what I need and zero hassles.
David,
So,
I got to say, that is so old-fashionedly beautiful. I mean, that is, I do a lot of estimating and negotiating for photographers, as one-offs, and I'm always telling them about building relationships. And that, what you just said, and what Sharon was saying about being decent, being, a good person, man, that is where the repeat business is. And it couldn't be simpler. It really
Yeah.
couldn't. How
Yeah,
hard is it to be decent?
I mean, I don't go out and advertise at all, zero, and I have to turn stuff away, and I'm at a financial position where I don't, I can just lay there on the couch all day and do nothing, but that's not in my soul.
Yeah.
And so I've had interns over the years, 20, 30 years, that I've seen go on to do great things, and spent time with them, and kind of mentor and gently nudge, and they do incredible things, and
Nothing more gratifying, right?
yeah, that's a true blessing to have had that opportunity to impact other folks. But here in the next several months, as I fire up the new photography festival, I'm going to meet some new photographers and maybe make some new friends. And I'm an old guy, but it's still fun to do.
Great. Well, if we have no other questions, but I have to tell you, this was another
Right.
great. Someone have a question?
Wanted to ask Sharon, were you able to, did you shoot black and white film, or is that digital converted, and were you required to shoot color? And how did you determine, were you able to determine you're going to shoot black and white with your wide lux? I'm assuming you could put whatever you wanted in it.
It was up to us to decide what to shoot. each one of us was a photographer in their own right before we came together at the White House. And we all had different styles. We're like a jazz band. We all got a different instrument, but we grooving and we throwing down. I think we had some of the most important photographic work that had ever been shot at the White House because of our access to all these meetings and decisions, and then the leaders of other countries who had dialogue with President and Mrs. Clinton. There's something to be said about if you dig on in and you keep working hard at it, it just gets better. And before you realize it, it fits on like a glove. You're not nervous, you're not worried. You're gonna get your job done. That comes first.
But there was no regulation, no government regulation. You have to shoot color. You have to.
None of that. None of that.
So it was a
And because
creative
we got
choice.
more than one camera, you figure one camera's got black and white in it, the other one's got color in it. You got the wide lux, you got the quiet camera where they're whispering and you don't want to make it click. So the Leica is a great camera. But with the change of lenses, I know how to change a lens so quietly. You don't even know how to change it out. You learn how to pace yourself.
How much did you get to collaborate with the libraries of the president once they got out? How much did they depend on you to come not talk, but to put together archives and that type of stuff?
We had a very good system at the White House. We had a photo edit office that Janet Phillips ran, and she was our archivist. So we put on the bags of film what it was we had shot and who was there. And then she would turn that in the captions for the proof sheets of what we had shot. So everything was always together. When we started doing digital, we only did it because we had to have the stuff as fast as we could get it. And now digital was the new way. So, I say 3 to 4 years before we got out of office, we had started using digital cameras and beginning to appreciate them. I remember the first time they brought a screen and sat it on my desk and said my proof sheets were on there. And I'm looking, the screen ain't on, it's off. And I'm like, this is a bad joke. Where are my proof sheets? Because I got to order the stuff. Where are my proof sheets? And they say, oh no, we're doing it a different way. I'm like, oh hell no. No. You're messing my rhythm up now. And Bob McNeely says, look at here. You got 2 more weeks of proof sheets and then it's to the computer. And I'm like, no. But that's what happened. So I learned how to live with computers.
You dealt with the change.
But what did after the president got out of office and put his library together, did you have anything to do with that?
No, they had already knew what they were going to do. We had already started having meetings almost 2 years prior to us even getting out of office.
All right.
Because we wanted to have the first digital archives. So the first company the military got, that silver gold halide that they put on that stuff, it didn't last a year. And we're going through stuff that's already been done. And I'm like, this is unacceptable. Got to get another company. And they dragged their butt about doing it. They had who they wanted, but I'm responsible. So I went and found folks in Virginia who did a great job. The stuff exists. It's alive and well because we got the right company to make these discs for the digital images. But the negatives and proof sheets, everybody's got duplicates in the archives, and the original stuff literally is at the Clinton Library.
There you go. Well,
Sharon mentioned Janet Phillips, and Janet was one of those career folks that she was working, doing the exact same thing in my office. And she retired, I think, when President Trump came on. So she'd been around there a long time, but she was one of those like unsung heroes that, we'd be running around crazy writing captions on film bags and trying to give her information, and she would make it straight. And you go to the presidential libraries today, and her work is what is causing you to be able to find the images. So
That's right, Janet.
good shout out, David. That's a good deal.
Yeah, there are those unsung people that just, you know, well, we took the photo, but without somebody being able to find it.
Janet.
Well, folks, that was a really terrific evening. I'm recuperating. I think I am, because this was the best 2 hours I've had all week. I've had horrible, horrible food poisoning, but I sat here for 2 hours and I haven't had any pain. So it may be psychosomatic. I can't even tell my family because they wouldn't believe it. But I want to thank Sharon. I want to thank David for donating your time like this to come in and to inspire us and to give us knowledge. That really is terrific. Also, everyone should know that both of the presentations will be up on the projections.live site probably by the end of next week, maybe a little bit sooner. So you can see this, or you can turn on other people. This is really a must-see sort of presentation. So I thank you both. And also, if other people have other people's, photographers that, they think would be great presenters, doesn't have to be at the level of David and Sharon, anybody. We're always, using this forum for for an outlet for photographers. So that's a standing offer.
Variety is the spice of life. The more you shoot, the better you get. If you don't go, you can't shoot it.
Yes.
Amen.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you both.
great
It
night.
was wonderful, a wonderful presentation.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Thank you, Frank, for
Thank
putting
you,
it
Sharon
together.
and David. Great sense of humor. Just like I needed that. I broke my thumb yesterday. So it was like the best, like hour and something of a lot of hours.
That's
Like
right.
I
Get back to
wasn't
your
in
fighting
pain.
weight. Get that hand healed up. Yes. Get the ball.
Good
Roll
stuff.
the ball.
To photograph with one hand today.
Okay.
So thank you, everybody. David again, Sharon again. We'll be in touch. And
Thank y'all.
David,
Thank you
when you have
Thank
your-
you.
You.
See you,
David, when you have your book ready to go, let us know. We'll have you on. You can talk to us about your book. We would
Okay,
love that.
sounds-
Sharon, same thing as well.